Hey, can everybody hear me okay? Are you awake? It's so good to see you guys here today. It's really nice to see such a full room of people. My name is Sarah. I'm a senior training lead for an organisation called Harmless. I can see a few familiar faces here today, which is great, but also hopefully some new friends as well. I'm going to be talking to you about self-harm in children and young people, and a little bit about our service. My role as senior training lead is to deliver training across the UK on mental health, self-harm or suicide. So all the big topics that people feel very uncomfortable about talking about usually, I kind of refer to them a bit like Voldemort, he who should not be named, and kind of just to kind of promote hope and recovery, really. So I thought I'd begin by explaining a little bit about what self-harm is. So self-harm is a behaviour, it's a coping strategy, it's a way of being able to deal with emotional distress. And I suppose the best way to visualise that is if you imagine a day where you've been really stressed out, hopefully that's not today, but a day where you felt particularly stressed. And I'd like to imagine that after this day, you get home, you walk through the door, and you stub your toe. I guarantee, in the moment that you've stubbed your toe, you are thinking of nothing else other than your stubbed toe, maybe with a few choice words, okay? That's like a very small visualization of what self-harm is. That the emotional pain is so much and so intense that the only way to shift from it or distract from it or to release what's going on is to injure yourself. So hopefully that just sort of starts to explain why somebody might hurt themselves in order to make themselves feel better. And self-harm in adolescence, it's very prevalent. It's something that's very significant and is spoken quite recently quite a lot about in the media in particular. Certainly research has demonstrated that over the last sort of 3 years, for example, GPs have found that there's been a rise in self-harm rates by about 68% for women. There's also been in the news, you may be aware of, a fifth of 14-year-old girls having self-harmed. And I'd also thought it might be interesting to look at what's going on in Lincolnshire as well. So between 2014 and 15, you will notice these are older dates, but we're always behind on statistics because it takes time to collate all this stuff. But there were noted to be 1,308 emergency hospital admissions due to self-harm. And it affects more women than men in Lincolnshire, and the highest rates were found between the ages of 15 to 19 years. And actually between 2013 and 15, the population of Lincoln City had the highest levels of self-harm, along with deprivation, long-term unemployment, alcohol-specific issues. Out of all of the districts, Lincoln City was the one that's kind of coming up. So hopefully that just sort of gives you a little picture. However, stats are fantastic, that we like stats, okay? But they only show us the tip of the iceberg. They don't really talk about the invisible voices, the silent voices that go on. Because self-harm is a coping strategy, okay, it means that actually, on average, it takes 5 to 10 years for somebody to come forward to disclose their episode of self-harm. So actually, in terms of prevention, we're often missing the boat. A lot of our statistics take into consideration, for example, hospital admissions as well, which sort of misses community data samples, perhaps, or those people who are not even interacting. Because as we said, it's a coping strategy. It does what it says on the tin. It's helping people to cope, a way of surviving, as it were. And I think also because there's so much stigma that surrounds self-harm, a lot of people might not even relate to what they're doing as self-harm. You know, if we look at the general population and I said to them, you know, what about a young 13-year-old girl lacerating her arms? Is that self-harm? And I would safely say 99% would all sit here and nod their heads at me. But if I put the question to them of a young adolescent boy who's come out of an exam and punched a wall, is that self-harm? That normally gets put down as aggressive or challenging behaviour. But actually that too is a way of trying to release some emotional distress of what's going on. In fact, we know, for example, it's very common for young men to get themselves into fights, not any kind of fights, but fights they will lose, fights with people that they know they will lose to. So sometimes even just our idea of what self-harm is just needs to kind of continue to be broken down, and that we're not just focusing on the stereotypes. In our service, we take any age range, we take anybody. The youngest person we've had in our service who's self-harmed has been 7, and the oldest person has been 77. We know this doesn't discriminate, so neither should we. Sorry, I'm going to give a cough. I was one of these 14-year-old girls. So when I was growing up, I had a very lucky life, okay? I was given lots of opportunities that not everybody gets to receive. For example, I was privately educated. I had a large family who loved me and were always there for me. But around the age of puberty, things really changed. So as a kid, I was, I like to say, confident and helpful. Some people might like to say bossy and interfering. I like to say confident and helpful, but I got stuck into everything. I really did. I really enjoyed my childhood. I gave everything a go. I wasn't too conscious of what I was doing. But things really changed for me around puberty. And it just interfered in everything. Everything that I enjoyed and everything I didn't enjoy. And it made life very difficult. So self-harm became a way of being able to try and handle that. I had a huge amount of fear around failing. You know, I wasn't an A-star student. I will happily admit that. A-stars were not something that naturally came to me. And I had to work really hard, and I didn't understand why I didn't fit in like everybody else did. And I think for me, I felt very dysfunctional. And there was only so many times as a teenager you can be told, well, you're a teenager, this is normal. This is what normally happens. You go through these phases, you're a bit moody, all of those sorts of things. So it just sort of shut me up, and self-harm was literally the only way of being able to survive what was going through. It continued for a very long time. I wasn't trying to be attention-seeking. I wasn't trying to be manipulative. It wasn't a trend. It wasn't any of those things. It was just my way of trying to deal with what was going on. It went on for a very long time. It wasn't until kind of in my early 20s, I was actually going to my GP for a number of physical health problems. I would like to highlight physical health, mental health, totally intertwined. And my GP actually turned around to me and said, "Do you have a lot of emotional stress, Sarah?" I sort of laughed at her and I said, "Well, don't we all? Isn't that just something we all have and we deal with?" And, you know, through sort of persevering with me, and I ended up going for therapy, we uncovered that actually I suffer with generalised anxiety disorder and depression. Now, labels aren't for everybody. I do want to make that, you know, reinforce that. But for me, it was a huge explanation for what had been going on, and it was a huge part of my recovery. And whilst the self-harm wasn't necessarily disclosed, it was the underlying issues being dealt with and being focused on that helped me to recover. And I can safely say I have not self-harmed. I haven't been suicidal for many, many years. And I think it's really important for people to know that they can go on to do anything they want to be able to do. I didn't introduce myself as a self-harmer. That is one thing. If you can go away from today, I didn't say, "Hello, I'm a self-harmer. What's your name?" My name is Sarah, and I did so much more with my life. And I think it's really important for us to drive that change and to lift that ceiling and that level up that hope for people. So I wanted to leave you, if I can. It's just with a little quote from one of our service users within our service. And I hope that you'll kind of join me in this, because it's very much the reason that I will not stop driving change and kind of hope towards saving lives. So this is what she says. She's a 19-year-old girl. She said, "I can see a great change in the way I used to feel and how I feel now after I started coming here. I feel much more positive about myself, and I'm able to have a life instead of just existing." Thank you. I'm not feeling my best today, apologies, but I am going to be here till the sort of the break time. So you're more than welcome in that break to come and chat to me. I just won't be able to last till this afternoon, unfortunately. So please feel free and come and talk to me, that's not a problem. And our details are in the handbook if you don't get a chance to see them. Did you want me to stay up for questions? Yes, please. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Sarah? And I can challenge Annika over to you.
Thank you. Hi. I work at the University of Lincoln in student wellbeing. I'm just an administrator, but I see what goes on. Do you think the high level of self-harm in Lincoln City can be put down a lot to the high student population, because we have a lot of students that self-harm?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's hard to say. So, because there'll be a whole number of things that are going on. We know with university students in general, there are a high rate of self-harm that's occurring. And in fact, there's a fantastic piece of research, for want of a better word there, fantastic, but a very helpful piece of research that's come out of the Manchester University research team around children and young people and suicides. The thing with statistics is there are limitations. So even in just how we collate data. So the example I can give you is in Nottingham, we did a Freedom of Information Act on the city hospital and the county hospital. Both collected data, but what they collected was in some ways quite different, which kind of can skew things a little bit. We did actually do one in Lincoln and Lincolnshire. Oh, well, I think you've got the one hospital here, haven't you? And that was, again, very different into how these sort of stats in Nottingham were collected as well. Even, I think a lot of the focus goes into how we define self-harm, and lots of people want to define it by the method. That's the symptom. It really is just the symptom. It's not the underlying issue. It's not looking at what the function is. It could be that because you have a higher population, that you're seeing more. If we know that, you know, that sort of age range, 15 to 19, and I think your next age range is your 20 to 24, are presenting quite often at hospital admissions, then that could be. But I think it's quite complex, or there's more to it, if that helps.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Any other questions?
I'm not quite sure if it's a question or not,
Go for it.
but more of a reflection about the children, the young people that we don't see, where you were talking before about where if they're not presenting at the services.
Yeah.
What happens with those and how we go about addressing that.
I think a part of it is how we can, what's really coming out in terms of best practice and guidance is that we need to be trained up in this. We need more awareness around this. Just out of interest, very briefly, how many of you have ever had mandatory self-harm training? Okay. Have any of you ever been taught about it at school? Okay. So how on earth, okay, are you guys, as loved ones, as professionals, meant to pick up on it if we never talk about it? So I think education is a huge, important thing that we need to be looking at, because we need to be helping people to spot things like warning signs, having those conversations. If you suspect, if you've got that feeling that, you know, whether it's because of unexplained injuries or because somebody said, you know, this is how I was feeling at the time and it resulted in this, have a conversation with that person. Ask that young person or that child, you know, what led to that? What was going on for you in terms of, at the time of that emotional distress? And what was your intent behind it? What was the motivation of what you were doing? Self-harm is not a failed suicide attempt. Very often it's something that can be self-managed. So I think it's more about addressing the underlying things and looking at what's leading up to that. And there isn't a special, like there isn't a knight in shining armour that's going to be able to fix all of this. It's all of our community support network to come together to be able to support these young people and children to feel better equipped. But don't be frightened about talking about it is what I would say. Even young people. We do PSHE sessions with young people, for example, and lots of people can get quite scared that it's going to spread, you know, and I'm like, well, you talk about sex, you talk about drugs, and they don't all go out shagging and shooting up heroin afterwards, okay? I'm not going to be handing out little kits or anything. I'm just helping to raise awareness and build that resilience. And so, yeah, it's a battle we need to be well supported for.
That's so interesting how that feeds into schools. Oh.
My age, you'd never really heard about self-harming. Mm-hmm. Do you think advertising, letting people know, gives them more encouragement for people to try to stress out or not stress out?
Good question. Really good question. So often with that 68% rise that I was talking about, loads of people saying, why is that? Why are more women, like one young girl, self-harming? Well, if we look back, and it's not even that long ago, you know, mental health was not something that was on the table. My job would not have existed. And I can tell you even today, when people find out what I do, I normally get the response of, that's nice. It's good weather we're having. People feel uncomfortable about it. So I think mental health was something we never really spoke about. Out of the 3 topics, that's now a lot more open. Suicide has got a lot of stigma and taboo around it. And self-harm's only ever really referred to in suicide. So it's kind of the baby out of the 3 topics. It's finally got kind of space. So I think there is more awareness in people understanding what's going on. So you will see more help seeking now. So people will be able to come forward because they know a little bit more compared to previously about what's going on. Whereas before, it's certainly something that went on. We've had service users in their sort of 60s who self-harmed when they were, you know, in their teens, but they never related to that because it wasn't something that was ever given a label as such in that sense. It is a behaviour, so it can be sort of something that people may try out of curiosity, but it's not a fad or a copycat behaviour. I think that's really important. There has to be something going on for an individual for them to think about trying that. And I think what we need to be conscious of as well is that it's much rarer. That, like the kind of notion of a cluster forming is a much louder voice. Okay, it's one that's in our face a lot more than the silent voice that you're not going to hear about at all. So there's quite a number of things that I think go into that, but I hope it sort of starts to explain some of the things that are going on there for you.
I teach in FE, and I find that a lot of the students that I deal with talk about sort of the social media aspect.
Okay.
That they've got peer pressure and, you know, Instagram, Snapchat, and feel that's something that
Can go through. There's a fantastic quote by a technology professor, I won't steal it. He says, the internet or technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. There's a systematic review that's come out around social media, and it is 50-50. There are good things about it, there are bad things about it. And I think it's about helping people, and particularly young people and children, to become digitally fluent. So rather than cutting down like censorship, rather than that sort of thing, which is what we often want to do to protect people, it's actually just about helping them to develop the skills to be able to make healthy choices in a really short kind of viewpoint of that one, because it's a big topic. Okay. If you've got any other questions, come and approach me in the break. That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sarah.